Afternoon. I think it is now gone 2 o'clock, and we're going to start the meeting. Thank you very much indeed for all your attendance. In starting, I think the first, obviously, is the declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest from anybody? I can't see any. I don't think there are any. And then I think the second item is the minutes of the previous meeting. If you could go through the minutes, are there anything to be brought up following those minutes? That was held on the 9th of December. 3 was the Anglesey Schools Information Governance Assurance Report. 4 was the Counter Fraud, Bribery and Corruption Strategy. Treasury Management. External Audit. Summary. External Audit, Students' Finances. The Local Code of Governance. The National Review.
Sorry, Chair, could I just interrupt you there? On the Local Code of Governance,
yes.
It was resolved that the committee's members, if they so wish, be invited to offer minor amendments. Just to confirm that there weren't any amendments, so it will go forward to the full council meeting on the 10th of March.
Oh, thank you very much indeed for that update. Thank you. I think the National Review and related recommendations. Internal Audit update. Internal Audit Charter and I think finally the updated forward work programme. So we can accept those minutes as true and correct.
Sorry, Mr. Caderi, go ahead.
I'll propose that they're correct.
Oh, thank you, Richard. And a seconder will. John Griffiths seconding it. Oh, just a minute. Willem.
Councillor William Jones seconds.
Thank you very much. Do we need to go round everybody to accept that then? Do it. Can we start? We'll start with John Griffiths.
Derbyn.
Accepts.
Dylan Rees.
Derbyn.
Accepts.
Alan Roberts.
Derbyn.
Accepts.
Margaret Roberts.
Accepts, Chair.
Jeff Evans. I can't. Probably Jeff is Jeff Evans. I don't think he's present at the present time, and I think the vice chairman Dilwyn.
Agreed. Thank you.
So we'll move on now to item 3 on the agenda, and I think Marion is going to lead on this, is she?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I won't go through the report in any detail, but just to highlight that we had a really good response to the advert for the recruitment of the lay members. We had 13 application forms. So we've done a shortlisting exercise and we'll be interviewing at the end of February. Happy to take any questions.
I have a question, Ms. Caderi. Can I ask a question, Chair?
Yes, by all means.
Can I just ask, you say that there were 13 applications received. How many of those were from Anglesey? Only 3 that weren't from Anglesey. Not from Anglesey. Oh, thank you. I'll look. I will look, but I think it was only 3 that weren't from Anglesey. Thank you.
I think you are to be congratulated at the speed that you move this to get that many applicants, because I know that I think you certainly were one of the first out with the adverts, and I think that that made a big difference to have sufficient numbers, because there's nothing worse. There was certainly a bit of concern about getting numbers to apply. But we will be interviewing, and as Marion says, thank you very much indeed. I think that then it is the item 4, which I think Mark, is that this is the Treasury management strategy.
Yes, Mr. Cadeirydd.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the document that everybody looks forward to every year, I'm sure, which gives us the Treasury management strategy for the year ahead. It's necessary, in line with the code, to bring this document in front of the council. So you, as an audit committee, begin that journey, and then it goes on to the executive, and then is adopted by the full council. So the intention is that it goes to the meeting of the full council on the day that the council tax is set, on the 10th of March, if I remember rightly. The report on the strategy has been written and agreed upon before the decision last week to raise the interest rate, base rate, up to 0.5%. It does make a little bit of a difference, but not much difference. It just speeds up, I think, the process of raising the interest rates in general. The strategy does take that into consideration, but we'll just have to keep an eye on how things go moving forward. And I think maybe we'll have to relook at the strategy if interest rates increase significantly. But as is noted in paragraph 4.2, even though that we foresee that the base rate will increase over the period of time, and it shows that it'll increase to 1.25% by March of 2025. We don't foresee much of an increase in interest rates of the PWLB, especially the rates for more long-term borrowing. Those won't change as much. So what you see is that the gap between the base rate and what PWLB would charge on borrowing does reduce, the gap gets less, and that then means maybe we'll have to rethink about the investment strategy or borrowing, and do we continue to have the strategy of using spare money of the council before borrowing, internal borrowing as it's called in the strategy? Possibly we'll have to relook at that, and possibly it'll be more useful for us to borrow rather than using our own money, because we'll get better interest on return on our investment. But that's something just to keep an eye on in the future. The rest of the strategy is more or less following where we were. There are details in paragraph 5 on our borrowing. We haven't borrowed much, nothing this year more or less, apart from one Salix loan, as it's called, which is money that comes from Welsh Government that we use for investments to save energy. You've seen that we've been spending on putting solar panels on the roofs of leisure centres and so on. It's that loan that's been paying for that, and we pay it back over a period of time out of the savings that we make in our energy costs. But long-term borrowing, we haven't borrowed anything this year, and we do use, as I said, our own money to fund the capital expenditure. You'll see in table 4 of paragraph 6.6 how we see our balances of our borrowing moving over the next 3 years, you can see that the borrowing will start to, loans will start to increase, and by the end of the period will be up to 167,558, and the internal balances where we've used our own money rather than borrowing will reduce from 12 million down to 1 million. That's still inside the figures that are acceptable and that we've set out in the strategy as regards the level of borrowing and also the level of what they call the CFR, the capital financing requirements. And just to remind you what that figure is, it's what we've spent on capital that hasn't been funded through the capital receipts, grants or reserves of the council, and that then gives you the figure that we've borrowed to fund that, less of what we've paid back or what we provided through the minimum revenue provision. So it's the sum we have left to fund our borrowing, and that increases as we borrow more, as you'll see from PWLB or wherever externally that we do borrow it. So the strategy does take into consideration the capital strategy to continue with the expenditure on new schools. And as you know, there's some of that, well, there's a lot of that comes from us borrowing, some borrowing where Welsh Government compensates us for the annual costs of the interest in the MRP, but about half of it does fall on the council to fund that annual cost. Those figures also include the HRA, Housing Revenue Account, and as you're aware, the council have started on the process of developing new units. We are using the balance of the HRA at the moment to fund that, but as that balance does reduce and runs down, we'll have to start borrowing. Welsh Government have been comparing the 11 authorities that still have their own housing stock to see what the potential is in the 11 authorities to borrow, and we are seen as one of the authorities that have a lot of scope to be able to borrow, to develop. That doesn't mean that we're just going to borrow just to build, because each development will have to look reasonable to us. You know, do we need housing of that particular type of tenancy in the particular areas that we would build, and does it make sense as in value for money to build? Because of course the HRA has to ensure that the rent that comes in for those houses does cover the costs of borrowing and so on. So there's a financial assessment made on each development, but if the need for more housing is there and that we can make it work financially, there is scope in the HRA to use the housing stock value to be able to borrow, and that'll have an effect on the figures in that table in paragraph 6.6. So that's our borrowing strategy. Of course, the interest rate has an effect on our strategy as well. And if interest rates do increase very quickly, we'll have to rethink, are we going to borrow and turn the internal borrowing we have at the moment into external borrowing in order to tie into low interest rates at the moment? If we leave it and the interest rates shoot up, maybe we'll lose that opportunity to borrow on interest rates that are advantageous to us. And as you'll see in the Appendix 5, I think it is, where it notes the loans and how much the average interest rate is. There are some borrowing that's been done years ago which are at higher interest rates than we would pay now, but we're tied into those kind of borrowing, and we are looking if it is advantageous to us financially to pay those back now, but the cost of paying them back is higher than how much we would save on the interest. So we keep that in mind also with our borrowing. Is it worth us borrowing to get rid of old loans? But at the moment, we don't see that it would make much sense and that it's not a good idea cost-wise at the moment. So that's where we are with the borrowing. So there's not much change in our strategy there. Investments then. Again, the interest rates will make a difference. We've seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks that we're getting better offer of interest rates on our investments than we were. We've taken the opportunity to tie in 7.5 million of our money into a Goldman Sachs account that we haven't used before, and they meet the requirements as regards their credit rating and so on. So we've taken the opportunity and we get about 0.75% on that investment. But of course, with investments, we have to make sure that we have enough money to pay the costs of the council as they come up. And of course, we don't put our money in places that are too risky. So that strategy stays the same. We need to ensure that where we invest is safe, that we have access to our money if we need it quite quickly, that we don't tie it up too long. Then the interest we get back is the third piece of the jigsaw and the assessment, if you like. But that's the least important one to us, really. I think it's accessibility and that the money is safe for the two most important factors. Of course, we try and work to get the best interest rates possible on our investments, but it's not always works that we can do much with that. And over the last period, it has been very poor, where banks are more or less promising us the world, and the only thing they're doing is holding our money, really. But hopefully things are moving on that investment side, and we can then relook at our strategy. But that's where we're up to with our investment strategy at the moment. Then we have the final section of the report or the strategy, which lists responsibilities myself for the Section 151 officer and members of the executive and yourselves as the audit committee members, which supervise what we do in relation to investments and treasury management. And also it sets out the prudential and treasury indicators, as they're called, and those are listed in Appendix 11, I think. Those are the targets which set out what we can do. For example, how much we're allowed to borrow. So there's a total there of 180 million is the maximum we can borrow. But as I've shown in the previous tables, we're far off that figure. So we are monitoring against these, and we will report back to you in the 6-monthly report and the annual report on how we've compared with these figures. So that's a summary, I think, of the reports and where we are at the moment. Things are quite flat, as I've said, because of low interest rates, but possibly things will change in the coming year, and possibly the next year I'll be coming back with a little bit of a different strategy if interest rates do increase significantly. Thank you, Chair. Happy to answer any questions from members.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think that was a very comprehensive report of what you've got, and I think it gives us some ideas of the many, turbulations and concerns that you have about the money market and about, particularly on previous borrowings on higher rates. Thank you very much. I think as a committee, our recommendation, we've got to consider this Treasury management strategy, and to make any recommendations or note comments for consideration by the executive committee. I've got a hand up. I can see is John Griffiths.
Yeah,
yes, thank you very much, Chair. In Appendix 3, with the economic background of the possible effect on ourselves in Anglesey and so on, the forecast seems quite dark considering the effect of COVID, interest rates of the bank, inflation, the economy of other countries and so on. Is there any good news at all, or anything promising anywhere? I think it's a lot of uncertainty, to be honest, around how things are going to develop as we come out of the pandemic. Of course, that's good news in itself, isn't it? That we are looking like we are coming out of the pandemic period where the world has to close down completely, and hopefully that will improve the situation of the economy, of course. There are short-term problems around inflation and the cost of energy and so on. The situation in the Ukraine doesn't help the markets probably. So over the next few months, I think hopefully that uncertainty will start to disappear and the markets will hopefully be a little bit happier with the situation of the world. But of course, there are lots of risks still in front of us. If there's a war, if COVID comes back, and there's a new variant, for example, that's affect the world. And then, of course, we've got the uncertainty in the UK government and Westminster and what's happening there. So it all creates uncertainty. And what the market doesn't like, of course, is uncertainty. The market likes things to be stable and they can bank on how things are going to go because they are gambling with money at the end of the day. So they like to know that all the factors are apparent to them before they make their decisions. So I think 22 will be difficult economically. Inflation will still continue to increase for a period of months, and it depends what the committee that decides on the interest rates decide to do there and how to manage inflation. Do they let it go and think, oh, it's a spike short term that we can live with? Or do we need to squeeze on expenditure by increasing interest rates? That's the formula that they have to manage prices, of course, is to make it more attractive for people to put the money in the bank rather than going spending in the shops. That's the strategy, more or less. So we'll see how things play out over the next few months. But hopefully by the end of the summer, things will be a lot clearer. And the one other factor, of course, that's behind everything still is Brexit, of course. Even though we've come out of Europe over, I think it's 2 years now, I've lost count, to be honest. The situation in Ireland and the discussions between the UK and Europe are still continuing. And if things get bad and that we pull out of the agreement, that changes our economy and the situation of our country a lot and has an effect. And there's lots of uncertainty surrounding that. Rather than being very dark, they can go either way, really. Things can improve or get worse, but it's difficult to say at the moment. Okay, thank you. Cross fingers then and hope for the best.
Thank you for that. I've got two more hands up. I've got Richard Griffiths next, and I think Dilwyn is the other one. So if anybody else wants to come in, those are the two that I've got at the moment. So Richard, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to you for that, Mark. Just a question I wanted to ask is you referred to building new schools and a percentage of money was coming from Welsh Government. Is it the same if we build houses? Is there a percentage of money coming from Welsh Government towards house building with the council? We do have the social housing grant, which comes from Welsh Government every year. That was only available to the RSLs, to claim. The council weren't allowed to previously, but I think they've changed the rules now that we can also claim a social housing grant. But that's just a small element. How the houses are funded, of course, is that they create income through rent, and the annual income then is enough to pay for the costs of maintenance of the houses, as well as paying the loan back. So, as I say, an assessment is made on every development to see when we'll get our money back, more or less. So we invest a significant sum into developing an estate of 20 houses, say, and then we can measure where we say, no, that's too long of an investment, or that's okay. We do change the assessments because sometimes we'll be okay to take a little bit longer to get our money back on some developments if that need for that specific housing in that particular area is calling out for that particular development, knowing on some other developments that the payback period will be a lot less because we can fund it in a better way. But with every development, we do try and get grants, and Welsh governments also do provide grants for building houses that aren't built in the more traditional ways. For example, we built an estate in Holyhead, if I remember rightly, on the old garages site where we had significant money from Welsh government because it was a way of building, a new innovative way of building that saved energy for houses. They were very green houses. The running costs of energy was very low on those houses. So I think that's where the money from Welsh government will come in future, not just to build houses with bricks as we've been doing over the years, but different ways of house building that'll make it more carbon neutral will be the way forward. So what we have to look at maybe is a way of tapping into that money in future to help us with the costs, because a house maybe like that will cost more to build, but it'll cost more for the tenants, but it'd be better for us to do that for the tenants, for example. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I've got one more hand up, and that is Dilwyn. I haven't got anybody else. Dilwyn, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask Mark, subject I've raised in the past on table 4, where we show for 21-22 that capital expenditure is just under 40 million. And when we spoke last, that target looked to me to be in jeopardy. Whether that is still the case, because obviously the amount we need for capital expenditure would be carried down to the bottom of the table and would reduce the amount of CFR that's closing on the closing balance. And the other thing I just wanted to mention in passing is that I find it very difficult to reconcile low bank rates with high inflation. And I suspect that all these optimistic statements about inflation at the current rate being a bit of a spike, that will not prove to be so, and that at the moment inflation is likely to continue to be a headache. That is going to affect the way in which we do working out of the strategy for Treasury management. Thank you.
Yeah, on capital spend, I don't think the news from what we're seeing from the report that will go to the exec on Q3 isn't showing an improvement in our capital spend. The slippage is still there. We still have issues surrounding contractors, availability of contractors, submitting tenders that we accept that are value for money. Not saying that they're not value for money, but the market has increased significantly in terms of where it's pricing, and whether it's acceptable for us to take those prices when we tender, or do we hold off, or can we even afford those prices? So tendering is is causing us difficulties. I know for example, we had in the capital budget the plan to repurchase 15 former council houses that were sold through right to buy, and when they come back on the market, we buy them. But as you know, the price of houses has gone up considerably. So when you take into account the price you have to pay and the cost of ensuring that they reach Welsh housing quality standard, it becomes more difficult to make them financially viable in terms of, is it worth us doing it, or do we just use our money to build from new? So we've had a few delays on things like that. There are always issues surrounding different things, planning issues. I'm aware of one scheme where we have planning issues which are causing a delay. We've been lucky during the winter that the weather hasn't been too bad, so we've caught up on some schemes because we haven't lost too many days to rain and snow or whatever. So, but generally the slippage is still there, and it's something we need to address going forward. On your point on interest and inflation, I wouldn't disagree here. There is some element of a spike because this time last year the country was in lockdown, so spending was down, which forced prices down. And when you compare, inflation is just comparing one year to the previous year, isn't it? So if prices were lower last year and they're higher this year, well, it is gonna have some inflation effect to it. So you would expect some drop in that inflation figure as we start comparing this year with an unlocked down last year. But I think things like Brexit, things like the general cost of gas and energy across the world is an inflationary pressure that will still be there a little bit longer. Like as I answered to Councillor John Griffith, it's a bit of wait and see, isn't it? At this moment, it could go one way, it could go horribly wrong, and could go another way.
Yes. Thank you. My follow-up question there for Mark is, in light of what you said about capital expenditure, is it still realistic to have the level or order of capital expenditure in Table 4 as part of the calculation of our borrowing need?
Hopefully, even though the timings are slightly different, the plan is still to spend to that level. It may slip to the next year, but over the term of the plan to 24-25, you would hope that we would have caught up and made up that slippage if we improve our processes. So yes, I would agree that perhaps those figures between the years may not actually work out that way, but hopefully we will be close to that balance of CFR and borrowing at the end of 24-25.
Okay, thank you.
I can't see any other hands up. If there are, they could shout out. If not, we need to, I think, go to a vote on this. And it was, I think it's really to accept the strategy. I don't think we've got any recommendations or to send any comments for consideration by the executive committee. It's in a very fluid situation at the moment. Can I have somebody to propose that we accept this excellent report on the Treasury Management Strategy statement? Sorry, I got two then, did I? Yeah, I got a proposer was Richard.
Yeah. Can I put in that, Ben?
Councillor John Griffith proposes,
Yes.
seconded by Councillor Richard Griffiths.
Thank you very much indeed. So we'll go around the. So it's Dylan Rees.
Derbyn, accept.
Alan Roberts.
Derbyn.
Accepts.
Margaret Roberts.
Derbyn.
Accepts.
Thank you. Gwilym Owen.
Derbyn.
Accepts.
I don't think Jeff Evans is here. Is he? There is somebody. No, Jeff is not is not present. No, and then it's just Dilwyn.
Accept. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that, Mark. I think we then go on to item 5, which is the commissioning the older people's care home placements. The North Wales Council and Betsy Cadwallader University Board. I think that's probably is head of adult services. Is he going to lead on this? Is he, Arrow?
I think somebody from Wales Audit Office is going to
Yeah,
start.
I'm here, but I didn't realise I was going to lead.
No, I dropped you in the. Just a minute. I better take advice here. I don't think you are leading. I'm very sorry. Yeah, Mark.
I can see Jeremy from Wales Audit Office, and I assume that Jeremy's going to lead.
Yes, I'll take you through the report then. Thank you very much. Okay, we carried out this piece of work across North Wales, looking at how the Regional Partnership Board members work together to commission care home placements for older people. The field work was undertaken between February and March 2021. And councils and health boards are responsible for commissioning care home placements, and they do this within a legislative and policy framework set out by Welsh Government. As we drew the messages together, we realised that this Welsh Government set framework itself was encouraging a way of working that was impacting on health and social care professionals and the people that they serve. This led us to write 2 reports, one for Welsh Government and one for the councils and the health board as partners in the RPB. We didn't carry out a similar piece of work in other regional partnership board areas in Wales, but we anticipated that many of the findings and challenges that we highlight in the report for North Wales will be replicated to a lesser or greater extent across the country as a whole. Our initial draft reports were with Welsh Government and the RPB partners in July, and since then we've worked with everybody to achieve reports that describe accurately and in a fair and balanced way the strengths and weaknesses of the current system. The main concerns that we raise with you are as follows, really. The partners are working together to provide care for vulnerable service users, but are carrying significant risks associated with market stability, workforce and pre-placement agreements, along with a reliance on spot purchasing. The Regional Partnership Board's market shaping statement set out some of the aspirations for care home commissioning, which were added to by the RPB's response to a Healthier Wales in 2019. However, neither of these documents have driven the development of a clear regional strategy for commissioning care home placements for older people, or a delivery plan to take forward the aspirations and help you move from where you are now to where you want to be. Whilst the RPB network brings partners together to think regionally, its structures largely set out by Welsh Government are extensive and complex, and lines of accountability need to be strengthened. Nationally set fee structures are complex and result in significant focus on cost, which causes division amongst partners as they determine who pays and who doesn't. And this has a potential to impact adversely on service users and their families. And also partners need to do more to demonstrate that they're meeting the statutory responsibilities around the Welsh Language Act and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act when commissioning care home placements and making individual placements. For Welsh Government, we've challenged them to look at some of the key legislative requirements that they undertake as they undertake their review of social care and health in the Rebalancing Social Care White Paper. And they need to assure themselves that the changes that they propose go far enough to resolve some of the long-standing challenges that we've seen and reported on. And in particular, we've asked them to look at the complexity of the funding models, to better describe how Welsh Government expects pooled funds to operate, to take steps to deliver better scrutiny and accountability of Regional Partnership Board activities and decisions, and to develop a framework against which to evaluate progress that the RPBs make towards the wellbeing goals. In concluding, whilst our report for Welsh Government clearly places some responsibility with them, it is essential that partners look at their own roles in the process, and that includes yourself. There are considerable numbers of older people in care homes, and the councils and health boards spend many millions of pounds in their care. And you need to be assured that public money is being spent wisely and that you are building a more sustainable care sector that has the provision for the types of care that you need for citizens today and in the future. To help with this, we've made 5 recommendations for the council and health boards. These are to ensure consistent use of the pre-placement agreements across the region. The current approach for commissioning care home places can cause tensions between partners and result in poor value and poor service user experience. And so we're asking you to work together as partners to review local arrangements for commissioning care home placements to eliminate avoidable adverse impacts on service users and each other. Accountability is a cornerstone of public sector decision making, and governance arrangements need to scrutinise decisions and hold decision makers to account. You again need to strengthen your partnership governance arrangements to ensure proper accountability and effective scrutiny of the RPB and its decisions. Through the Regional Commissioning Board, you need to develop a regionally agreed care home commissioning strategy, and following this, develop an associated delivery plan. And you need to review the commissioning arrangements for care home placements to ensure that they fulfil their statutory responsibilities around the Welsh language and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So it's quite a tough report, quite a tough read, and it's been a long time in the making, and with a lot of discussions and a lot of work's gone into trying to get the wording right. But more than happy to take any questions, Chair, on the report as it stands.
Thank you very much indeed. I could perhaps ask a question to start with. It's, you know, as you say, it is a long read with a lot of information there. And there's, you know, there's nothing that's very straightforward with care, particularly with the funding of it all. I was just wondering, many years ago we went to visit in another area in independent living. You know, we put a hostel up and put people into there, which was received very favourably. People were living in their own units, you know, and being fed, and they had company and everything else. We, as an authority, then built another successful one. The first one was in Llangefni, which if anybody visits, you before COVID, obviously, was how happy and how settled those people were, and you know they were seeing out their elderly age with friends and with company and with everything else. And I'm just wondering, when you're talking about these models now, ought we to be encouraging more of these models? You know, quicker, because it gives me an impression that you can, you know, certainly by recognising people who have got this great need, you know, can no longer fend for themselves, but they can in with company with other people and having that care. Isn't that a very cost-effective way of perhaps addressing some of these problems?
Chair, you raise a good point, and I mean, in the North Wales response to a healthier Wales, there's a definite push to encouraging people to stay longer in the communities through either sort of domiciliary care provision or through these extra care independent living establishments. And that's having the knock-on effect then on care homes, because when it means that someone does go to a care home, that their needs are greater and more specialist than perhaps they are today. And this is why we're saying, and I go back to saying one of the recommendations is about getting that strategy for care home commissioning across North Wales. So you need to determine what it is you want, the balance of the types of care that you need within those care homes, and then a roadmap to get you from where you are now with perhaps a greater level of more general residential care than you might need in the future, you know, to where you want to be with that at that more specialist end, with more people continuing to be maintained in the community. And so that's set out in the North Wales Partnership Board's response to a healthier Wales.
Yeah, I think thank you very much. I think that was a very, very, very good response, and certainly very positive. I've got Dilwyn's hand is up, I think.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like just to ask Jeremy whether he's any comment to make on Appendix 1, which shows the Regional Partnership Board structure chart. before I ask him for his comments, I'll make my own. Looking at this from the what I'd call the patient's or the user's point of view, I think, walk away as it is a little bit bewildering. And I'm concerned at the overhead that is associated in running a structure as complicated as that. And whether, because we have a structure like that, it actually makes life more difficult for our customers and for placements and so on, compared with a much simpler one. Thank you.
And the RPB structures are set out largely by Welsh Government, and because you've got seven main partners in North Wales, plus the additional ones in terms of Care Forum and organisations like that, it's inevitable that you've got a very complex and very sort of, confusing structure. And we make the point in the report, don't we, that the RPB there brings partners together to think regionally, but its structures are extensive and complex, and lines of accountability are difficult, blurred, confusing, certainly need strengthening. So certainly from my perspective, that Welsh Government need to think about their expectation around who sits around that table and how it works and how it operates at a local level. I mean, what we have seen is that effective subgroups doing a lot of work, and the RPB itself, the board itself being a set of meetings of 35 plus people that take sort of 300 to 400 page agendas, document packs. It's very difficult for them to be effective at that level, and so certainly it's an area that we're encouraging Welsh Government to look at with the aim of making it simpler and therefore more effective.
Thank you very much. I got one more hand up, but I'm just wondering now that I've gone past Arowell. I asked if Arowell, would you like to come in at all at this stage, or?
Yes, if I may, I'd just like to sort of support what's been said in one sense in terms of the placements that we've got. We're seeing that people are more complex entering residential care, and they do remain there for shorter periods of time. So it does concur with what Jeremy has said, really. Likewise, in terms of our strategy as an authority, I think we would want to develop more extra care type facilities or variations on that theme, really, to try and ensure that people have the opportunity of remaining in a homely environment for as long as possible. But it does reach a point when we're having to support people in the community and they cannot longer be supporting the community and do need residential or nursing care. So it's a strategy that we sort of support, really, and the recommendations here, I think they have been mulled over quite a lot, haven't they, Jeremy, in terms of that we've reached a consensus, really, in terms of the direction of travel.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Harold. I've got Alan Roberts' hand up, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope Jeremy doesn't mind. I'm going to broaden the discussion slightly. I found this reading the documents here. It's quite damning in some places. Now, obviously, we're concentrating on one area here, the care of the elderly. But Welsh Government wants us to move to work on a regional level in so many areas now. For example, the CJCs, which are coming into being very, very shortly, and other areas as well. My feeling is that we've been rushed into some of these, and not enough thought, preparation, etc., has gone into this. What's the main lesson you've learned for Welsh Government out of this particular study that should be taken into consideration now as we move to work in other areas on a regional basis?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I think really from what we said in the report to Welsh Government is that they need to be clear about what their expectation of the partnership is to be. And so that they can objectively evaluate progress that you know, in this case the RPBs make towards the wellbeing goals, and so they need a sort of a set of measures that they can, you know, ask people to collect that demonstrates movement to deliver what the Welsh Government's aims and ambitions for that piece of way of regional working is set out to do. And then you need to have the mechanisms to deliver that at that regional level. And what we've seen in North Wales is that, you know, regional working can work. You know, you've got a very effective economic ambition board that we did a review on not too long ago and gave a very positive response to, in terms of the strong governance model that you'd set up with that, the, you know, good work that it was doing in terms of developing the programme and portfolio office, and the way in which it was adapting and flexing to the changing context within which it operated. You know, the RPB needs to be put on a similar footing to that, with good governance, good accountability, good links back into home partner organisations, and that's your gift, your responsibility as a key partner around the table. And then what Welsh Government needs to do is it makes sure it needs to set out that expectation right up front and at the beginning, and that's what we framed within the recommendations that we've made to them.
Thank you for that, because I feel that structure has been put in place and vitally important here. So we have the right procedures, everybody knows their role, position, etc. And we know the expectations that we should be aiming towards in the end. Thank you.
I've got two more hands up, and I'm going to go to Gwilym first, and then to the Leader of the Council.
Yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn, Mr. Cadeirydd.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Jeremy, for your report. I think there are a number of things in this report that we could raise as issues. Of course, you have an emphasis on regional working, but for us as local members, it's the local area that's always important. I remember a former member of this council, the late W.J. Williams at Talwyn, who was a very highly regarded elected member on a national level. And he said that with local government, it's local that's important. You know, whatever area you're looking at, but especially care. It's important that we get our house in order at a local area before looking at it from a regional perspective. You refer to a number of things in your report, stabilising the workforce, retaining and recruiting staff. It's very difficult if you compare pay rates in the health and care sector. You know, there seems to be an unfairness in that area, and I'd like to have your comments on that situation. You also talk a lot about collaboration. Well, if I may praise for once, can I praise the situation as I see it here locally in North West Wales and on Anglesey? We have community resource teams on the island, and we have arrangements across the island where health and social services work very closely together. We also have arrangements, and I'm not sure if the 6 authorities in North Wales do this, but we do have arrangements where we have laming visits as elected members, where we visit different organisations and have an opportunity to have a very detailed discussion with the staff, care staff, certainly in residential homes and so on. And we have the opportunity to discuss with them, and health as well. You, Chair, and I have had an opportunity to do this with the community resource team here on Anglesey, and especially in Ysbyty Penrhos in Holyhead. So those are my comments, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Do you want me to respond to those, Chair?
Yeah, I'm sure that would be very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can't blame us being parochial, can you?
No. I mean, you make a good point about needing to resolve the local issues. I mean, I think I just point you back to the Healthier Wales statement, really, and say that, the Healthier Wales initiative is encouraging you to keep more people in the community, more people close, and that's absolutely fantastic, and that really answers the point that you raise. However, when their care needs increase as they get more frail and so on, they're not going into residential care sort of relatively young and relatively fit. They're going into residential care when there really is no other alternative for them. Some of the care that they need is so specialist that there's no way that any one council can afford the specialist kind of care close to home. And that's why we're putting forward in the report the need for this regional strategy, because together you can afford that kind of care. And by working together, you might end up with a specialist home that is 40 or 50 miles away rather than 150 or 160 miles away. And so we're certainly not trying to stop you deliver what you need locally, but to get you to work together better, so that you can get some of those specialist services paid for collectively closer to home than they currently are. So that's my comment on regional working. And in terms of collaboration, yeah, absolutely. And we're not saying in this report that you're not working together. I mean, I think one of the headings there is partners are working together to provide care. We're not for 1 minute saying that you're not doing that. But what we're saying is that the system within which you're working is causing those tensions between yourselves and your partners, and certainly in terms of the health board. We also know that the pooled fund for care home placements is a subject of great controversy in North Wales. But we also know that there are pooled funds between yourself as a single council and a health board that work effectively and work well. And so it's about building on what works well and working stepwise into those bigger and more challenging arenas, so that you can continue to work collaboratively on a broader scale than just between one or two partners.
Thank you very much. I'm now, Slinos is here. Well, welcome, Slinos. Perhaps you've got your hand.
Peter, I'd like to make a few comments as the elected member who represents the council on the RPB as the portfolio holder for social services. And it was interesting to hear Jeremy talking about the ambition board, because as leader I represent the council on that as well. As a audit committee, I can tell you that the two boards aren't the same. The economic board came together because the 6 authorities saw a need to develop the economy. It's developed organically. The RPB is in place due to legislation. So it's important that we start from there. It's important that I also say that economic development takes place at different layers. What's happened in the RPB is that everything is thrown into it. And I'd like to remind everybody that there are 40 plus people who attend these meetings. And I tell the Welsh Government very often that it isn't really a strategic meeting. There are fundamental questions here. Is the structure of the RPB set by the government going to make the difference that you want out of this report? I don't think it will, because there's a huge financial risk to the pool budget. And as the Welsh Audit Office, I hope that you would say that the model you have to work within now isn't safe in terms of governance. I think we're being monitored and inspected on something that isn't fit for purpose. We mentioned the CJCs earlier, but that's the direction we're going in. The ambition board started from the bottom up, but now we have the government telling us what to do. And what Dilwyn started was with where is the patient? How does the patient understand that all? We've lost the patient in this regional discussion, and we've forgotten why we're doing it. I respect the report. I respect the fact that you've had this remit to look at this issue, but I'm much more concerned about the wider issues. Money will be wasted at the end of the day because there are administrative issues around these services. The big question is, what are we doing differently in Anglesey, Gwynedd and Conwy and so on? We need to work on this. We should have selected the subject and started from there, as the Ambition Board did. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak.
Thank you for your contribution. I'm sure Jeremy would like to have.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I take your point, Leader, about the different starting points for these two groups. And I also take your point that the RPB, because it's prescribed in legislation, its membership, it's more difficult to evolve it, to change it, to mould it to a way for you to work. And that's the point of the sort of recommendations that we've made to Welsh Government. You know, it's to challenge them and saying, well, you know, does this really work? Is this delivering against, you know, the goals that you set for it? You know, better describe, you know, what you expect from a pooled fund, you know, because we, you know, does anybody really know? Do you know? Are you being objective about the way in which it works? Are we being practical about, you know, whether it's actually something that can work or not? You know, are the risks too great? And we've laid that in front of Welsh Government, and I think that's it. Yeah, we've used North Wales as the example for that, and don't suppose that we'd find different examples elsewhere. So we've made that challenge, and you know, I urge you to find the national report that we've written for Welsh Government, so you can see that our words directly in that, because the two reports really do go, you know, hand to hand together in that way. Money will be wasted. Yeah, that's a difficult phrase for me to just swallow. I don't doubt that it's true, and part of that is because of the complex funding models. You know, that there's sort of, you know, 4 or 5 different placement types, and you know, you can multiply that up by the different ways in which it's funded. There's continuing healthcare, there's nursing funded care, there's self-funders, there's, you know, council funders, there's joint funders, and all of this kind of stuff. It's complex and it's difficult, and some of it's based on, you know, financial assessment of the service user, and some of it isn't. So there's a lot of bureaucracy in here, very complex systems that's sitting within a very complex framework within the RPB. So yes, I don't doubt that you're right that the money will be wasted, but that's the purpose of the reports and of what we're trying to do, and we're trying to get you to streamline as many of these processes as you can to take away the points of, you know, dispute, the points where the partners get sort of cross with one another, and we're challenging Welsh Government to look at it and make sure that their policy reform goes far enough in solving some of these deep-seated challenges that, you know, the way legislation currently framed poses from the operational side of it. And you're right, Klinos, again, it's the people in this, you know, the people going into residential care. This is their last care step, if you like, on their lives. This is the thing that's going to be the last thing that happens for them and their families in their lives. And to think, you know, we were struck as an audit team, you know, about how awful this must be for some people, particularly those without advocates or family to help, those that are placed a long way from home in a home that doesn't speak in the language of their choice. You know, at the end of the day, it's people that we're dealing with, you know, vulnerable people, elderly people who've given much to our counties and our country, and to treat them in this way through this system is not really quite cricket, as they say.
Thank you very much. I don't think I can. Is there anybody else? I can't see any other hands up. I think that, Jeremy, might be the end of it. And I think we just have to thank you very much, you know, for your presentation, which is obviously, you know, we had a good discussion on it as well. I think what it remains now for the committee is to accept, the commissioning of the older people's care home placements. Can I have a proposer please, and a seconder?
Report.
So, sorry, I've got Alan Roberts and I've got Dylan Rees seconded. Is that right? Thank you very much indeed. Can I just go around then? And that'll be John Griffiths.
Deadburn.
Margaret Rose.
Accept.
Gullum Jones. Richard Griffiths.
Accept.
Richard Griffiths.
Accept, Chair.
Thank you.
Accept.
And Derwin.
Accept.
Thank you very much indeed. So we now move on to the number 6, the item number 6, which is the letter in relation to the counter fraud arrangement. I think, is Marianne leading? I think Marianne is leading on this.
I think Alan from Audit Wales may put the report, and then I can put the response. Is Alan still on the call?
Alan's off unwell at the moment, I'm afraid. So I don't know if we got someone else who is it. Yvonne's here, I think. Can Yvonne take this?
Unfortunately, I haven't been involved with this myself. Sorry.
Okay, I mean, my understanding is it's a letter that we wrote some time ago following a piece of work that we did around the counter fraud arrangements. So we carried out a high-level review of the counter fraud arrangements across 40 organisations in Wales, including all 22 local authorities. I think we made a number of notes, if you like, following the fieldwork in Anglesey, which was a sort of high-level evaluation of the arrangements, document review and a self-assessment completed by the council and some interviews with relevant officers. We put forward that the council would benefit from updating the anti-fraud and corruption policy, which was many years out of date. Seemingly last reviewed, as long ago as 2012. Update the fraud response plan, ensuring it's communicated to all staff and third parties and members of the public. Council needs to ensure that plan provides direction to those who raise concern. I think that's important. Some of the things that we have internally, we have quite useful and regular refreshers of sort of money laundering and fraud concerns, so that we as auditors can sort of spot it as we go about our business. It's a similar requirement really in terms of what you need to do for your officers and for the public also. Senior leadership team need to consider the ways in which it can strengthen its approach to promoting good anti-fraud culture within the organisation and giving zero tolerance regard to fraud, identifying ways in which it can educate and raise awareness of anyone. And in doing that, sort of undertake a risk assessment, as part of your overall risk management strategy. I've touched on the need for sort of annual programs, training, identification. It's a cyclical thing, isn't it? And I mean, basically the letter that we wrote and the recommendations we wrote, we're talking about, strengthening and refreshing your arrangements in order to make sure that, the anti-fraud, anti-corruption was in the forefront of everybody's minds. I think, Chair, I'll leave it there if that's okay.
Thank you very much indeed for stepping in there. I think that did Marion want to come in now? Did she? Or
yeah, I'll respond if you like, Chair.
Yeah, I'd be very grateful.
So as Jeremy's outlined there were 10 recommendations that Audit Wales made back just as the pandemic landed. Actually, I think it was about 2 days before we were all sent home. So you'll be aware, Chair, that the internal audit team were depleted during the during the pandemic. So all non-essential work was postponed, including this fraud work. However, committee will remember that you had the strategy last year that came to you, the counter fraud, bribery and corruption strategy came to you last year. We'd recognised some of these, well, all of these actually, recommendations in the strategy. One we found was not applicable, and that was because there was a recommendation to procure a case management system to manage cases. Well, it's just not value for money to procure a software system to manage one, maybe two cases of fraud a year. So we've put that as not applicable. 4 of the 10 have been implemented and 5 will be completed during the year. As I say, they were all recognised in the counter fraud, bribery and corruption strategy last year as areas we would be tackling this year. We'll report progress in our annual report at the end of the year to give you an update then. But I'm happy to take questions, Chair. Oh, just one, sorry, before I finish. As Jeremy said, I think one of the first things Jeremy said was about the anti-fraud and corruption policy being out of date and not having been reviewed since 2012. And it was pointed out to the auditor at the time that the policy forms part of the Constitution, and as such it is reviewed on an annual basis. So in fact it has been reviewed. It does need refreshing, and it is one of the things that we are planning to do this year.
Thank you very much. I think that you mentioning reviewing was very, very interesting and very pertinent at this time. There has been, isn't it? I've got one hand up, and that is Dilwyn at this stage.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I see the letter came just at the start of the first lockdown, and it raises for me the question of whether working from home has increased the opportunities for fraud to occur. We've seen examples in central government of the way in which quite a lot of the funds that were allocated specifically as counter COVID measures to relieve the population generally have been subject to massive fraud. To the point that they've sort of thrown their hands up and said, can't do anything about it, we'll write it off. It goes into billions of pounds. And in a way, although I accept very much that COVID has interrupted the work, it seems to me that getting the recommendations implemented by almost 3 years after the letter is leaving things a little bit late. Thank you, Chair.
Would you like me to come back with that on the response to that, Chair?
Yes, I'd be delighted.
The committee will recall that, just to pick up on Dilwyn's point there about the grant fraud being one of the most susceptible areas to fraud, one of our team was seconded to the grant fraud, to the grants team. So we had actually somebody immersed and embedded in the team to make sure that we did recognise or identify any fraud. And I'm pleased to say that all our post-assurance checks of the grant frauds and of the grants in Anglesey haven't identified any fraud whatsoever. You will remember that we were the subject of a fraud right at the very beginning of the pandemic. It was a cyber attack, not on us. It was a cyber attack of a supplier. Those things have been put in place and addressed and resolved, and the IT team manager will be able to, I'm sure, talk about the increased risk of fraud due to cyber attacks with the pandemic and home working. Many articles in the sector, the professional sector now, are highlighting how susceptible and vulnerable we are to fraud now, following with the increase in home working. But that's more on a cyber level, I think, than anything else. As I say, we had to, as a team, consider our priorities to provide assurance on the risks that the council were facing during the pandemic, and fraud and these 5 outstanding items just were not considered a priority in our work.
Thank you very much. I think that's very reassuring. I haven't got anybody else with hands. Was there any more questions, or does that bring that item to a close? I think that brings it to a close. It's just a case that the recommendation is that this committee, the Governance and Audit Committee, reviews and notes progress with addressing recommendations by Audit Wales in relation to countering fraud. Can I have a second of a proposer? I need a proposer. Sorry. Yeah, I've got Gwilym Jones, and I think probably Dylan Rees. You seconding it? Thank you very much indeed. So if I could just go around the committee, to be John Griffiths,
Herburn,
Accept.
Alan Roberts,
Accept.
Margaret Roberts,
Accept.
Richard Griffiths,
Accept.
and Dilwyn.
Accept.
Thank you very much indeed. That brings that item to a close, and then we move on then to item 7, which is the Regeneration of Town Centres in Wales report. I'm not really sure who's going to lead on this. Is it Christian?
One of my colleagues, Matt Bruchette, is here, who was involved in the field work and writing the report. So he's going to lead on this one, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Chair. It's just myself, Matt Bruchette, and Nick Selwyn, who worked on the report with you today, just to summarise the context and the findings, and then we'll put it to you for any questions. So just to set the background to this, this was a national report. It's part of Audit Wales programme of national studies, and it's published last September. So it's important to say it's not a specific audit of this authority, but it's an audit, a national review across Wales. The approach was just to look at previous regeneration projects and current regeneration strategies across councils. And towards this, we interviewed regeneration leads across councils. We carried out surveys with citizens, businesses, officers and members. And we produced a self-assessment tool, which I can see you've completed as well, which we're very grateful for. We also produced an interactive data tool, which I'd encourage you to look at as well. Just to remind members of the findings of the review, we found that town centres are at the heart of Welsh life and can be vibrant and sustainable places, but addressing the many challenges they face requires brave decisions and ambitious leadership. Just to break this down briefly, we saw in the last few decades seen rapid changes on the high street. We all know we've lost a lot of essential services and seen a general trend towards out-of-town retail. These have accelerated also with the effects of online shopping, and the effects of the pandemic as well made these challenges harder for Welsh Government and local authorities to tackle. One of the more interesting things we found was the interconnectedness and the interdependency of towns, and the sort of trend to look at towns in isolation, whereas actually towns are a network of that rely on each other. So one thing we found was just the need for local authorities just to view these together and look at what the purpose of these towns is and what they contribute to a local area. In terms of Welsh Government investment, they've invested £900 million in this area over 7 years and adopted a town centre first policy. We found despite these interventions, many challenges remain for both national and local government, and many town centres, as you all know well, still struggle. So we found that local authorities could be more effective using existing powers and working better with partners to put in place long-term strategies. And a good way to think about this is by summarising it into thinking about what your intention is and be clear and on purpose for town centres, what information is out there and what information is used to prioritise your strategy with town centres, where you'll intervene, and how you'll intervene in terms of working with landlords, landowners, and using enforcement powers, and also involvement of communities and local businesses. Just to summarise the recommendations from that, we made recommendations to Welsh Government to address non-domestic rates, challenges around transport infrastructure, streamlined in funding arrangements for town centre regeneration, and to set out how it plans to deliver its town centre first approach. Now, for local government, we made recommendations for councils to use existing enforcement powers more effectively, particularly the softer powers, not just compulsory purchase orders. Also integrating this with wider departmental strategies and ensuring that you've got the capacity and expertise to use these powers to achieve good outcomes. And we also recommended the use of the self-assessment tool. And as I said, thank you for completing this. Just before we've got some thoughts on your completed self-assessment. If I just pause there, I don't know if anyone wants to briefly just go through your assessment, or I can carry on, but I'll just pause there briefly, Chair.
I was looking at, I can see Mr. Derry Lloyd there. I don't know whether he wanted to. You were very much involved with it, were you?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry to spring you on. I wasn't sure, but I thought that you were very much involved in it.
Yes, I led the preparation. I did involve other officers. So no, I thought the review by Audit Wales was very good, very thorough. I don't envy Matt having to sit through 22 of these meetings.
We're very used to it. And they were very insightful as well.
So please, you continue.
Sure. Just on your, unless you've got anything more to say, Dewi, I can just give some thoughts on your completed self-assessment.
Yeah. Look forward to seeing your comments. Obviously, we've not done anything like this before, and it was a useful first time for us. So we value your feedback.
Thank you. Well, I mean, the self-assessment tool is very much intended as a tool for yourselves, just to revisit where you are with this, really. So just to add some value for yourselves. But just some thoughts on that. So it's just encouraging to see that you've responded positively to the findings. We see it as quite a thorough response, and that it's just a good way of showing members how you've responded to this. It also shows good acknowledgement of strengths and weaknesses as well. So, you know, it's a very honest account of where you are. Just in terms of future steps, we think it'd be good if members of the scrutiny committee could just agree on addressing how those aspects, where the authority believes there's more to be done. So perhaps turning this into an action plan might be something you want to consider as a step forward. And also, there's possibly something in there about clearer, measurable actions and just setting out timescales on how you plan to take this forward. But other than that, just thank you very much for setting out your response to the recommendations. And I just wonder if there's any questions. Nick and myself would be happy to respond.
Oh, I've got I've got Mr. Dylan Rees.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Matt, for this report. And I'm sure that we'd all agree that we'd love to see our town centres across the island regenerated. I'm a local county councillor for Canolbarth Morn, that's central Anglesey. So Llangefni town is sort of right in the middle of the ward. And I must admit that I find it frustrating, and Dewi knows my frustrations, that we have a number of local organisations who are seeking to make a positive difference in the town. You've got Llangefni Regeneration Group, you've got Cwmni Tref Llangefni, you've got Llangefni Social Enterprise, you've got Llangefni Town Council, and then of course you've got the County Council as well. So there's 5 different groups who are looking to make a positive difference in Llangefni Town, but it's the lack of a joined up approach that is the problem or the challenge. And I noticed that in your recommendations, you say town centres are changing and local authorities need to be receptive to these changes and plan to manage these shifts. Are you saying that it's always the county council that should take the lead and other agencies should work in partnership with the county council? Or should the county council be asking other partner agencies to take the lead and the county council should provide support? Which should it be?
Will I respond to that one, Chair? This is Nick Stell when I work with Matt on the report. I think the answer would probably be both. We've got some good examples from across the UK where a local authority is taking the lead and has really transformed town centres which have been in decline for a number of years. So in the report, we reference the work in Stockton-on-Tees. We also draw on some examples from Scotland with the Dumfries partnership approach, where the local authority provided direction to local bodies to take a leadership role within it. And I think there are some really good mechanisms already in place in Wales that are being used by a number of communities across the country. So in the report, we reference the positive work of the new town place planning approach that the Town and Community Council has taken, which has allowed them to start tackling some long-term, difficult to resolve problems in that particular area. And you've also got examples with business improvement districts like Love Treorchy in the top end of the Rhondda Fawr, which is a community that's really transformed that local area. I think the starting point's got to be real honest dialogue about what your ambitions as an authority are, and then finding the best mechanisms to deliver change on the ground. And sometimes that will require you to intervene a lot more than you would probably want to. On other occasions, you may have someone that's already taken on some of those leadership roles and is able to deliver some of the challenges, address some of the challenges that they face. I think the key thing in the report which we draw out is involvement is essential. You have to involve the full range of people that will benefit and use towns. Otherwise, you really are pushing that boulder up the hill, that you're trying to change things which others may not necessarily support or agree with.
Thank you. I think you highlighted something there. Where it's really got to be a tremendous joint effort. And I think communications and working with them, because we're involved in some other schemes out in the country areas about place mapping, and it's quite difficult to get people to come. It will be different in towns because you've got businesses there. But it's getting these people to engage, and they've got to pick it up and run with it, because the opportunity there, when you read the report, the recognition that can happen and the improvements that can relate, and the money that is there, to improve all these things in towns is quite amazing. But we've all got to work together, and I think that is the big message. I've got another hand up, and I've got Dilwyn.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask whether, in looking at the regeneration of town centres, any account was taken of the role possibly played by tourism. We all know how tourists can pack a town out, and I often think that Beaumaris is a very good example, where there's a basic attraction, which is the castle. Not every town is lucky or unfortunate enough to have a castle. But as a result of visits by tourists, you'll find that it generates the growth of things like small shops, boutiques and so on, and cafes and restaurants. And that helps not just with local employment, but it helps to make sure that the town centre is regenerated. In many respects, I would have liked to have seen a bit more of the references just been recently made about giving us exemplars of places where regeneration has been successful. And I don't just mean in the UK, but I mean maybe worldwide. It's something that has happened in many places, and maybe there are some lessons to learn as to what is the best practice to employ. Thank you.
If I deal with the second question first about examples from across other parts of the world. This report, when it was produced, there was another report produced by Welsh Government that accompanies it, written by Professor Carol Williams from the University of Manchester. And that report did a deep dive in 3 communities in Wales to understand how local markets are changing. So that report draws on a lot of examples from across Europe to identify some of the changes that have taken place in some of our European counterparts and the approach to regeneration that they have. So there are some lessons to learn, I guess, from that wider work. And we tried to develop our work to align with Professor Williams's study and not to try and duplicate each other, to ensure that people had the full remit. So I would strongly urge people, if they're not read it, to have a look at Carol Williams's review. It's produced on behalf of the Welsh Government, but as I say, by the University of Manchester, it does give some really interesting findings. And part of that work was completed by a professor from a university in Rome, looking at examples in that country. In terms of tourism, we did factor into tourism, and some of the places which are thriving are natural tourist areas. So Narberth in Pembrokeshire is seen as a town that's really turned itself around, has got a growing economy, is attracting lots of tourism to the area, and they have benefited with that bounce because they are providing services which are valued by tourists. But when you think of the scale of the challenge we face, it's a smaller market within a bigger whole. We have roughly 190 places in Wales with 2,000 or more residents. Of those, the ones you would classify as traditional tourist areas or tourist resorts are a mix of places like Beaumaris, which is doing really well and is really successful. But there are lots of other areas, and I could name quite a few where I live. Barry, for example, in the Vale Glamorgan, Porthcawl in Bridgend, which are struggling at this time and not being able to make that sort of transition and turn things around. And what makes them different and standalone, I guess, is the point Matt made at the start. It's how well connected these places are to the wider community and how dependent they are on the services that are provided in that broader sense. So I imagine that Beaumaris, unlike Barry, is a smaller community, probably is a bit distant from larger conurbations. Barry struggles because it's near to Cardiff and not too far from Swansea. So you get these sort of playouts because of the geography of the country as well. And that's really some of the challenges.
Thank you. I've got 2 hands up now. I've got Alan Roberts first, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I come to the question, I must admit, since I spent this morning going around Beaumaris, I'm one of the local county councillors. I'll give you an example of some of the information we gained this morning, pointing to their success. Over 300,000 people went on the pier last year. That is only a fraction of the number of people who visit the town. We were then dragged around the jail to see what the volunteers were doing there in upgrading the building to make it far more attractive for visitors, etc., etc. So it sounds very positive, but unfortunately for a town like Beaumaris, when you do have this success, it breeds problems as well, as young people be basically shut out of the whole housing market. So success doesn't necessarily mean success. It breeds problems as well in the area. The question I wanted to come to is, we hear a lot about levelling up the fund, etc. these days, and it's pushed as the way to bring communities together and to bring them up to a higher standard, etc., etc. from central government. What role do you think does the levelling up fund have? And how much of a difference will it actually do in the long run?
When we completed our review, the Levelling Up Fund was in the process of being set up and finalised. So we didn't comment on that particular funding scheme. But I do know that the National Audit Office have published a report recently that looks at the Levelling Up Fund in a bit more detail, so members could look at that to get an understanding of some of the challenges that's going to bring. Will it make any contribution, I think was part of the question. Undoubtedly, if you've got access to more funding and it's used in the right way, then obviously it's going to have an impact on the ground. The one thing I would say is a strong message from our work, though, is that the level of funding and authorities are drawn on the work you undertake, particularly around physical regeneration, are areas where you are pretty good at doing those sort of things. You've got a long track record in undertaking building works, improving sort of facilities in the state. That's not the issue. I think the bigger challenge is being clear on the purpose of towns in the future, because towns are not going to be like they were in the past. We know that, as Matt said, there's been a general drift away from essential services being placed in towns, the growth in online shopping, the expansion of that sort of way of people, I guess, accessing services is going to continue, not diminish. So many towns have had an oversupply of shops and oversupply of retail. So it's thinking through, what do you want to try and achieve in your town? You've mentioned some good examples in Beaumaris. So the Levelling Up Fund there could be used to support some of that. But you're quite right, all of these things can potentially come with a hidden cost or an unknown cost, or make things which are a local problem much, much worse. And housing is a great example. So you've given some examples of, I guess, the negative impact of house prices rising. In other communities, the alternative problem that when you lose shops, house prices falls. So you look at some of the South Wales valleys, places like Blaenau Gwent, Torfaen, Merthyr. It's the alternative problem there. They don't have any demand for quite a lot of the accommodation. So the loss of shops then leads to people leaving the community, and some of them, they've got a depopulation taking place. So it's quite a complex problem. And that's why we talk in our report about being clear on the information you have that allows you to make some really informed choices on what are quite difficult issues.
Yes, I think one of the lessons that's been learned in Beaumaris is that you have to work together with the local community, whether it be the town council, their individuals, groups, etc., the county council, etc., etc. It's bringing together all these people and setting a clear goal of what you want to achieve. And once that's in place, I think you're on the way then to solving problems or to achieve what you want to achieve in the end. But you must, like Lina said earlier, start from the base and work upwards rather than having something pushed on you, which sometimes doesn't work. It works in the opposite direction, unfortunately.
So, thank you. I've got one more hand up, and that is Richard Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Matt. As you probably know, Anglesey consists of 5 main towns, and I represent Amlwch. Amlwch was the 3rd largest town in Wales in the 1700s. It's very hard to believe. It is frustrating when you hear the term levelling up. I mean, the term levelling up should be levelling up places which have issues. I don't think it'll apply to Amlwch. I just feel so frustrated as a county councillor for the last 5 years that Amlwch has declined even further. And all the shops are closed, all the factories have gone. But the main problem we have in our town, and I'm sorry if I sound despondent, but the main problem that we have is the economy has been sucked out of our town because of lack of shops. So they go into the other 2 main towns on Anglesey to shop. So the very economic fabric of Amlwch is down because there's no shops here. There's no jobs, nothing. What can you say about terms of levelling up for our town? Could Matt or Nick answer that, please?
I'll go first, and then I'll hand over to Matt. I think the challenges are massive. And I don't think it can be underestimated, the issues that you're trying to deal with and address. Where things have turned around successfully outside of levelling up funds, and I quoted some of the examples certainly in West Wales and South Wales, which I'm more familiar. It's built on very strong local leadership with a clear vision for what you want to achieve in your town, and using the powers you have available to you flexibly, by having that, I guess, ambition as an authority, working with county councillors as well, with the local town and community councils, to make changes on the ground. I think the example of Amlwch and communities of that nature, though, is that if you think of the interconnectedness of these areas, not every town is going to thrive on the way you want, and you have to accept that towns have different purposes and different roles. One of the things that we were quite struck by is the research by the Institute of Welsh Affairs. The Understanding Welsh Places information really shows how towns are interdependent and interconnected, and that allows you to start thinking about what can you do to help individual towns, but within that over-regional footprint. It's not easy, though. I appreciate that you're having to make some really tough choices on different towns and communities, and that's never easy for local people. I mean, I live in an area I sit between the glamorous triangle of Penarth, Cardiff and Barry in a smallish village, and we've literally lost every local service. And I accept that, where I live, I took the choice to live here, but I'm not going to have the services that others who live in Barry, Cardiff and Penarth have access to. And that's partly my choice. And I do find it frustrating, but I do recognise that there's a bigger scalability in these other communities, and they're just natural places to attract more investment. And I'll get the benefit when I visit. But, I fully endorse the point you're making.
Thank you. I don't think I haven't got anybody else with their hands up, and I think that probably that does conclude. And thank you both very much for your contribution. That was jolly interesting. I thought there was some good questions.
Chair,
yes.
Mr. Dewi Lloyd want to? I'm sure Mr. Dewi Lloyd had his hand up.
Oh, I'm very sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to pick up on the points that we made there. In terms of Llangefni, we have recognised the need to address the issues in Llangefni. I have a meeting with Menter Môn tomorrow to consider what can be done there. In Beaumaris, we've secured some regeneration funding to gap fund the Beaumaris Social Club derelict site to provide affordable housing. So on Amlwch, there is a North Anglesey programme. There's a programme manager part-time for North Anglesey, and there's some NDA funding. And we've also secured Welsh Government funding to assist a new hub for Môn CF in the closed down Barclays Bank in the High Street, which will be opening in April. Funding has been prioritised in Holyhead by the Welsh Government. They were prioritising larger towns. Anglesey and a few other rural counties have been lobbying for smaller towns to be given support as well. So the policy is now changing, and capital funding is now available to all five towns on Anglesey through the placemaking grant. So those are capital grants up to 250,000, which are now available. And we're also Welsh Government have also indicated that they have a 3-year funding cycle, because it's been very difficult with annual cycles, because you have no money in Q1 and 2, and then you're awash with money in Q4. In terms of the UK funding, there's levelling up funding, which is capital, but there's also very substantial revenue funding through the Community Renewal Fund, and also the new Shared Prosperity Fund. So I think the SPF in particular has a substantial budget, which will be larger than the funding available now. And that scheme is very open-ended. There's far less regulation or criteria to satisfy on the UK funding side. Local authorities are very free to designate their own priorities within a broad framework. So I think there are opportunities to assist the smaller towns through those pots in the future. So I think there's more that we can do. There's more money available for the smaller towns from now on.
It's a good job I didn't stop you having your voice, because there seemed to be some very good news at the end of all that, and I think that could be, particularly from some of the concerns, particularly up in Amlwch and places like that, be encouraging. Thank you very much. I think that I can't see anybody else with their hands up. I think that would bring it other than to thank both of the speakers for their contributions. We need now to accept this report, and I need a proposer and a seconder to propose that we accept this report on the regenerating town centres in Wales and the recommendations. Can I have a proposer? Yeah, I've got Richard Griffiths and I've got John Griffiths. Thank you very much. And then I'll just go around quickly the other members. it'll be Dylan Rees,
Derbyn.
Alan Roberts,
Derbyn.
Accept.
Margaret Roberts,
Accept.
Gwilym Jones,
Accept.
and Dilwyn Evans.
Accept.
Thank you. So with that, we move on now to I'm not sure whether who's going to do this for us. Is the it's the item 8, which is the external audit Anglesey Isle of Anglesey County Council audit summary, to present the report of the external audit. I have got Alan. Are you doing it again, Jeremy?
I'll do it again, Chair. Yes, thank you.
Terrific. Good job you turned up.
Well, yeah, that's what happens when a member of your team goes off sick. You have to step in. So there, it gives me a good challenging session. Anyway, okay. The annual audit summary is literally what it says on the tin. It's a summary of all of our audit work over the 2021 period. There's nothing in there really that you haven't seen before in individual reports. It's just all wrapped up in one, one short document. I mean, it's written as being, a précis of what we've done. If you want all of the detail, you have to read the individual reports, and so it'll give a flavour to perhaps, yourselves, members who don't, engage directly with us, members of the public, and so on, and officers as well. Of the commentary on what we've done in the year. So what's it contain? There's a little bit about the facts about the council and its duties. There's a part about the Auditor General and his duties, audit of the accounts, sustainable development, value for money. That sort of sets out, what our raison d'etre is. And then we talk about what we found. So we talk about what we found in relation to the accounts, what we found in relation to the response to the pandemic, continuous improvement, financial sustainability, and so on. The summary also goes on to list reports like the one you've just heard, Regenerating Town Centres in Wales. So it's not only work that we've done at a local level through your Alan and myself and Yvonne as your local engagement team, but also by our studies team as well. So more than happy to take any questions on that if members would like.
I don't. I can't see anybody with their hands to ask. I think we've accepted the report. Okay. No, I can't. I don't think you're going to be questioned on that. So.
There we are then. Jolly good. Got off easy there then.
Yeah, but I suppose we've also got. We could do them both together, could we? And the item 9 is the external audit again. It's the Audit Wales programme and timetable.
Yeah, that's the update to this year's programme of work. So the current year, it talks about all of the areas of work again. So it kicks off there with the annual audit summary, which we've issued to the council. You've got the final one on the agenda. The financial audit work and where we're up to with that. Talks about our performance audit work. So again, commissioning older people's care home placements. You've got the final report. We've talked about that today. We talked about the assurance and risk assessment. Actually, we can talk about that. We've got a presentation to senior leadership team, next week, I think, or the week after, or maybe early in March. Not quite sure. That's looking at the risks and challenges that we've discovered along the year and what might be in our programme of work for next year. We've got the Springing Forward project, which is looking at workforce and building assets, and the field work for that is being undertaken at the moment, and so on. And so, as I say, this document literally tells you where we're at with each piece of work that we've currently got ongoing, both at a local and national level, and also covers the work of Estyn and Care Inspectorate Wales. So you've got a complete picture of what's going on and what you might get to come to expect in terms of reports and outputs from us over the next few months. And as you know, we update this quarterly, so this is the end of December picture that you've got in front of you.
Well, I think you've satisfied all the members with that. I can't see. Thank you very much indeed. What I need now is, thank you very much indeed, Jeremy, for taking that on. What I need now is that we can accept both of those external audits, number 8 and number 9. And I would ask for a proposer and a seconder, please.
Proposed.
Sorry. Yep, I've got John Griffiths is seconding it, and to propose it. Yep, that's Dylan. Thank you very much indeed, Dylan. And John Griffiths seconded. So if I could just go around just quickly, we've got Alan Roberts.
Derbyn.
Accept.
Margaret Roberts.
Derbyn. Accept.
Gwilym Jones.
Derbyn.
Accept.
Richard Griffiths.
Derbyn.
Accept.
And Dilwyn.
Accept. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So that finishes both of those reports. And then we move swiftly on then, I think, to the annual insurance reports. And I think, I can see is Julie Jones going to do that, or is it Marion? Julie?
It's Julie, Chair.
Thank you, Julie.
There's notes of the reports to summarises the policies and challenges to the council and so forth. The main policies are to do with vehicles, and there are different access depending on different policies, and there is a cap on some of them, so they do vary depending on the policy. In accepting the excess, this lessens the premium that we pay, and then improves the management we have of the risk. At the end of last financial year, it was 1.25 million in reserves, and there was the premium for 2021-22 was around 718,000, including tax and an increase of 8% on the previous year. And this was because of losses nationally and the effect of inflation. It is not a reflection of the situation in Mourne. With regards to claims, there is a summary in Appendix A from the 1st of April 2016 to the 1st of December 2021. So the summary is there for you to read. You have to note that the number and the sums paid and the sums in backup can change over time as they are settled, and as claims are accepted, some take years to be approved. With regards to employee claims, and public liability claims, they are continuing to reduce. I think there are 3 at the moment. And then motor claims, again, they have fallen. But the costs are increasing. With regards to properties, the weather is the main reason behind these. Storms, for example, and then claims go up. And some can be quite substantial depending on the storm. There's also 4 that happened before 2016. and there is a sum has been allocated for these, and it does reflect the nature of some of these claims, that it does take a long time, years, for them to be settled. So the level is relatively low, but they are getting more expensive to settle. Moving forward, the pandemic has a positive effect on reducing claims, but there may be new and different challenges going forward as we work in a different way as we have been during the pandemic, and possibly different ways as we're coming out of the pandemic. It's been recognising in the meeting that fraud has increased during the pandemic, and this can continue to increase and affect claims. There may be false claims being put forward. With regards to housing, a little bit of housing disrepair challenges being received, and they aren't reflected in Appendix A. They are dealt with separately. It requires resources to deal with these and to pay legal costs and compensation where applicable. We only receive a few claims, but some authorities receive hundreds of them in a year, and this could be a challenge moving forward if they do increase to those levels. Climate change, we've all noticed over the past few years there are more storms, more floods, and then they have an effect. This can affect the individuals, the community, and how much our insurers pay. So the costs are going up, and this is because of Brexit and the pandemic, inflation, supply chains, and so forth. And it's also a matter, previously, if you broke the bumper traffic car, you just changed the bumper. But by now, there are all sorts of sensors that need to be changed so that the costs are going up. Similarly, in construction, we build in different ways that are they're more technical, and so these things cost more. With regards to injury claims, they are going up, especially when people require continuous care following an accident. We are fortunate we don't have a lot of those, but as people are living longer, then of course care costs will increase, and then the cost of claims can increase. So this means that sort of insurers will be paying more. And this might be reflected in the premium we pay, even though our claims aren't going up. But it's important that risks are managed effectively so that we can lessen the amount we pay in excess and so forth. And also keeping premiums as low as possible going forward. I'm happy to take any questions.
I can't. Just shows you what a good understanding they all have now following your talk on that. I think you've been very explicit about the insurance claims, and it's mind-boggling now, as you quite rightly say, and particularly in these present times, and some of them can be greatly inflated. Thank you very much indeed for that report. I had Marion down, but I don't think Marion wants to. You wanted to deal with the insurance, did you, Marion?
No, Chair. I'm sure Julie would be happy to answer any questions you might have. I don't think
there are any questions. I think she's done a wonderful job.
Dilwyn and Councillor John Griffith have got their hands up.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I'll take Dilwyn to start with it.
Chair, you might have guessed that I'd be asking a question.
I didn't ignore you.
2 points. First of all, are there any indications at the moment that suggest that the excess levels should be altered. I'm talking, they're shown on page 176 and range from £50,000 to £250. How long have they been like that? Because they've been, well, I can see it's 5 years since they were last checked. So that's my question. The second question I have is, when we retender for insurance, do we go through brokers? Thank you.
Okay, your first question regarding the excesses, they are on renewal. We have a long-term agreement with the current insurers currently, and within those we do have an annual renewal process. The appropriateness of the excesses are checked during those, and where we think we should seek different excesses, we do sometimes ask for alternative quotations to that, or sometimes the insurers will sort of say we're no longer willing to offer the terms that we did. We need to increase your excess or reduce the cap or increase the cap, whatever. So those are reviewed annually as well. And at the moment they are considered appropriate for this current insurance year. Regarding the second question, sorry, I forgot what it was.
Well, it's whether you use brokers.
The brokers, sorry, yes, of course. Last time we went to tender, we didn't use brokers, but there were issues when we did that. So moving forward, we probably will engage brokers in the next opportunity to go to tender.
Okay, thank you.
And then the other hand is John Griffiths. Thank you.
I believe Dilwyn may have asked the question I was going to ask. I was going to ask if the council sort of went on various insurance companies for better rates at all. That was my question, basically. Have
you gone around different insurance for better terms, for example? We do go out to tender every 5 years or so. When we last went out to tender, we did commit to the current providers, and it was very competitive last time, and it came out through the national procurement process, and that's what we'll do moving forward as well.
Thank you very much. I can't see anybody else's hand up. Thank you very much indeed for that, Julie. I think we've had an understanding. I now need to approve this, or the considers and comments on the report. Can I have a proposed?
Yep. Mr. Cadere.
Happy to propose, Chair. Happy to
Richard?
propose.
And I've got a seconder, I think. I've got John Griffiths, I think, to second. Thank you very much. So if I just go around quickly again, Dylan Griffiths. Dylan Rees. Dylan?
Yeah, Katina, Devin.
Agree, accept.
Alan Roberts.
Accept. Apologies for the dog barking.
Margaret Roberts.
Accept, Chair.
Guillermo Jones.
Accept.
And Dilwyn Evans.
Accept. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That concludes the insurance. And I think now that we move on to this is the another internal audit. It's item 11, which is the internal audit update. And I think to present this report, I have Marion down on this. Do I have Mark?
Yes, Chair, it's me.
Thank you.
Very briefly, we have concluded 2 reports in the period. You'll see the first one, information governance, was a reasonable assurance, so I won't dwell on that. I will preempt a question from Dilwyn about the assurance levels and the apparent inequality between them, or inconsistency between them. Despite the two major risks and the housekeeping issues identified, the outcome of our review was mainly positive with information governance. And because it's information governance across the whole council, we were fairly reassured that we have all the policies and procedures in place. And the difference with the software license management one is that our assurance was just on software license management. So it was a much more closer scope. So I thought I'd preempt Dilwyn with that one. Yes, so moving on to the software license management piece of work. This is a piece of work we've commissioned from Salford City Council because of the technical expertise that they have. As I've mentioned previously, we've exhausted our technical expertise in terms of IT. And so they have specially trained IT auditors to come and do this piece of work for us. Although it is a limited assurance, we are reassured that there is a solution on the horizon with the proposed migration to the cloud-based applications. So this should address the majority of the issues that we raised. However, if you do have any questions, I do have Matthew Henshaw on the call if you'd like to ask any questions on this specific audit.
And I can't see anybody with a hand up.
Dilwyn has his hand up, Chair.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're quite right. Dilwyn. You're on mute.
Unmute. Can you tell us roughly what the cost of software licenses for the council?
As a total figure, I don't think I have that to hand. All the software licensing for the authority is coded to a single central budget, and I think it's approximately last year ended up at just in excess of £580,000. So that's across all the individual user licensing and the software licensing and maintenance of those software licenses. That's likely to have increased somewhat this year, as they do tend to increase generally in line with whatever agreed mechanism there either is in the contract or the supplier adds on if they're outside of contract term. That's the annual budget for all, so that probably in line with the scope of the audit itself.
Is there any way of reducing that?
There is, and I think probably some of the mechanisms described in the documents come from that perspective. So there's an element of risk control as far as the use of unlicensed application. There is also the value for money element as well. So they mentioned controls to do with a register of software assets and to where those individual assets are aligned to. One of the general findings is that without a comprehensive register of where they are, there is a chance that members of staff may leave the authority licensed for a piece of software, and then there's duplication of purchases. So what they are suggesting is there should be a more automated or more integrated way of understanding where licenses are, so that there is a way to recall those. So that's one of the suggestions we have on the management response is a better track of who has what, so we're not duplicating and repurchasing the same licenses.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I've got one more hand up I can see, and that is John Griffiths.
Thank you very much, Chair. The point 14, monitoring the licensing situation. So unauthorised licensing. Is there more risk that risks could? What actions are we taking to prevent such things from happening? I'm just reading the report. I've opened it in English, I'm afraid. What point are you referring to? 14 on point 14 on page 5. So is this recognising what's on the assets register? Do you have such examples of people doing this, or maybe what are you doing to prevent this? what is the risk in doing this? I'm sure there are examples when this can happen, where parts of the company work in partnership with other companies, and we may not be familiar with the licensing arrangements, or whether there's an obligation to add to